Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I live on the third floor of a brick walk-up on Milwaukee Avenue in Chicago's Logan Square, 1 block south of Palmer Square Park. My apartment faces the street. The old sash windows let in every bit of sound from the avenue. The distant horn of an inbound Blue Line train, cars idling at the light by Sacramento, the thump of delivery trucks bouncing over the manhole near the bike lane. On normal nights, that noise is just the pulse of the city. On the night the broadcast started, that pulse cut out in a clean line, the way a sound engineer fades volume down to absolute silence. It was a little after 11:40 p.m. I had a kettle of water cooling on the stove and a spreadsheet open with a list of audio equipment for a small venue on Fullerton that hired me to tune their system. I do freelance sound work and maintenance, live rigs, small theaters, nightclubs, things that run on schedules and checklists. I'm not a dramatic person. I like things that can be measured. At 11:58 p.m., my phone vibrated with the same tone I always hear during blizzards and tornado warnings. It was the federal system that sends alerts to phones nationwide. The banner took the whole screen. Emergency alert, do not exit your home. There was a second line. Shelter in place. Law enforcement and emergency services are deployed. Stay inside. Secure doors and windows. Avoid contact with unknown persons. It named the city and county. It had a timestamp. The alert tone sounded 3 times. The text repeated twice in English and once in Spanish. After the third repeat, the phone stayed lit and then dimmed without another notification. The first instinct I had was ordinary. I walked to the door, checked the deadbolt, set the chain, and looked through the peephole. The stairwell was empty. The light over the second-floor landing hummed. I switched off the gas oven, poured the hot water into a thermos, and filled the sink. Even in ordinary emergencies, water is the first thing to go from the tap. I know that from a burst pipe the building had last winter. I turned the faucet to a slow stream and moved a clean stock pot beneath it. I checked my battery backup by my desk, a mid-range, uninterruptible power supply that keeps my desktop and modem running during brownouts. The front panel read 100%. My blackout kit sat on the shelf above it. 2 LED lanterns, spare AA and AAA batteries, a hand-crank flashlight, a small first aid kit, and a plastic box with bandages and a roll of athletic tape. I took them down and set them out. I texted the people I always text when something unusual happens. My sister, who lives near Hyde Park and works at a hospital, my downstairs neighbor, a teacher named Carla, and Mateo, who runs the coffee shop 2 doors down. I wrote the same thing to all of them. You get that alert? You okay? The city was quiet enough that I could hear the compressor on the building's old refrigerator cycle. The heater clicked and settled. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the street. There were no cars, no voices. The Blue Line kept running, which reassured me more than it should have. Trains continuing meant power was on and transit wasn't shut down. I went to my desk and turned on my radio scanner, a handheld I keep charged for work and for storms. The screen filled with the usual alphabet of frequencies. The local weather band was reading clear. The city fire dispatch tone sounded once, then again. I heard normal calls, smoke alarms, a stuck elevator. Nothing that matched an order that severe. Police channels were busier but not chaotic. I heard units called to check on people who had run into traffic, to a disturbance at a convenience store on Fullerton, to an intersection where drivers had abandoned cars in the middle of a lane. The dispatcher's voice was steady. I didn't hear the words citywide emergency. I didn't hear anything that said don't go outside. At exactly 12 a.m., the broadcast cut in again, not to the scanner, but to my phone, and then to the small smart speaker in my living room that I usually use for timers. Emergency alert. Do not exit your home. Stay inside. The sentences were short. The voice was clear and plain and had no music bed. The speaker is linked to nothing except a local Wi-Fi network. I hadn't asked it to relay alerts. I hadn't set anything up for that. But it spoke the message again and again, every word spaced out so there was no confusion. It included a city service number and then a statement that the lines were overwhelmed. It included a repeat in Spanish and then a repeat of the first lines. At 12:02 a.m., the voice stopped cleanly, as if the file had ended mid-breath. I unplugged the speaker to be sure it wouldn't start again without warning. It stayed quiet. Carla texted at 12:06 a.m. I got it. I'm not opening the door. Are you okay up there? I wrote back that I was fine and asked if she had water and food. She had some basics. I told her I had more, and we could trade if needed. Mateo didn't answer. My sister wrote at 12:11 a.m. We're at the hospital. They brought patients in from the west side who... The order is real. Do not go outside. Lock your door. That was all. She didn't answer when I asked if she would be able to come home or if she would stay at the hospital. I didn't press. I know her job. When an alert goes citywide at midnight, the hospital does not empty. At 12:20 a.m., it started. It wasn't a siren or a helicopter or anything I could classify. It was a set of footsteps outside that did not match the empty city. Heavy, heel first, like work boots on concrete but out of rhythm. One set, then two, then three, moving down the sidewalk in uneven intervals like people pacing and then stopping to listen. There were no car engines, no doors opening and closing. I heard a single metallic clatter from the alley, like someone bumping the dumpster behind the pizza place on the corner. Then silence. More footsteps. I moved the curtain back a finger width and looked down. The streetlights showed an empty block. A bus sat at the stop near Belden, hazard lights blinking. It looked like the driver had pulled over and left it there. The ads in the light box glowed pale. The wind pushed paper down the bike lane. I didn't see anyone, but the steps came again, slow, measured. They stopped beneath my windows, then moved on. Past midnight, in a neighborhood that never stops moving, the sound had a weight I could not ignore. I let the curtain fall back and stepped away from the window. At 12:50 a.m., the phone vibrated again. The same message, the same words. I controlled my breathing and made a decision. I would treat this exactly like the severe blizzard we had 3 winters ago, when the city asked people to stay off the roads, and I would treat the noises exactly like what they might be. People who had not seen the alert or who had nowhere else to go. The mind has a way of building threats out of echoes. If I followed routine, I would not add to that problem. I took stock. I had 2 weeks of dry staples, most of a box of rice, and a case of ramen. I had a half bag of oatmeal, protein bars, and some canned beans. I had a water filter. I had a Honda portable inverter generator in the basement from my work. Quiet, clean power, a model bands use when they need to run a small backline outdoors. The building has a yard where I could run it without fumes getting into the stairwell if the power cut out, and a 25-foot heavy-gauge extension cord. I had an old camping stove that runs on isobutane canisters and a carbon monoxide alarm. I wrote the inventory down. That is what I do when something has to be managed. I create a list and I work it line by line. The broadcast repeated at 1 a.m. It had the exact same pacing and the same words, as if it was being triggered by a clock. The sound outside shifted from footsteps to voices. Not many, not loud. One voice saying help in a normal tone as if the person was down the block and speaking just a little louder than they would inside. Another voice saying open up Then a third voice, a man's voice close to the building, saying my name. I did not move at first. I did not look through the peephole or open the curtain. I stood in the center of the living room, feet flat on the rug I bought off Marketplace, and I forced myself to think of the normal ways someone would know my name. Mail on the box downstairs. The door buzzer panel. The way neighbors talk on the stoop. It would be nothing, I told myself. Someone from the building. Someone who thought they saw me earlier. The voice said my name again. The way he said it was wrong. There is a rhythm when people call for you from the stairs. They add a question at the end or they add a sound. This was flat. He said my name as a statement, and he paused in the middle of it, like he was testing the syllables. He followed it by saying, "Open." Then, a few seconds later, "Please." But the please came late, and he did not sound urgent or tired or out of breath. He sounded like someone who had learned the word from a recording. Carla texted, "Don't open. There's someone on the second-floor landing saying my name, too." I wrote back, "I hear it." She sent, "He said my maiden name. It's not on my mailbox." I asked if she had called anyone. She said no. We both waited. We listened to the building. At 1:13 a.m., a child's voice came from the sidewalk. The words were clear, the tone ordinary. "Mom?" That was all. The word did not change. It did not taper into crying. It repeated at a steady pace at the same volume without a breath between it and the next instance. "Mom?" 3 seconds. "Mom?" Then silence. Then footsteps again. I tightened the deadbolt even though it was already set. Between 1 o'clock and 2 a.m., the noise moved from the sidewalk to the back alley. I heard cans shift and a lid roll a foot or two. I heard someone brush the chain link by the bike parking. I texted Mateo again. No answer. I texted a sound tech I work with at the club. "You home?" He wrote back at 1:24 a.m. They cleared the bar at 10:30. I'm at my girlfriend's in Avondale. Cops told people not to drive. I'm staying put. He sent a photo from his window. The Milwaukee-Belmont-Kimball intersection, empty of cars. The lights cycled through to nobody. The broadcast repeated at 2 a.m. It had the same content and the same gaps. The landline on my kitchen wall rang. I never use it. It is a service that comes with the internet. I let it go to voicemail. The caller ID, for once, did not say unknown or a spam label. It looked like my sister's number. I pressed play. What came through the speaker was the tail end of the automated message, the word inside, then a pause, then the same line again followed by a click. I called back. The call went to a recorded message that the circuits were busy. I tried her mobile and got the same message. I waited. I sent one text I knew she might see later. "We are inside. I will not open the door." At 2:15 a.m., there were coordinated footsteps on the stairs. One set went up to my landing and stopped by my door. Another set stopped on the first floor by Carla's. Another stopped below. I breathed in and out and went to the peephole because pretending the sound did not exist would not make it stop. Through the peephole, all I saw was the long rectangle of hallway leading to the turn. No one stood in front of the door, but I could hear breathing near the wood. Calm breathing, unhurried. A few seconds later, the breathing stopped and something touched the door right above the handle. It was not a knock. It was a slow brush, as if someone stroked the paint with their palm. I watched the chain droop once under a small pressure and then go slack again. After that, silence. The steps went back down. I kept the peephole to my eye for a full minute, then 2. Nothing moved in the hall. I stepped back, checking that my weight didn't creak the floorboards. Between 2:30 and 4 a.m., short sounds came and went. A cough, a scrape, a sigh like someone about to speak and then not speaking. Twice my name was said, each time in the same evenly paced way. Twice, I heard Carla's name in the same tone. It was not the way neighbors talk. I tried the radio again and heard dispatchers redirecting units away from certain streets. There was no new message from the city beyond the phone alerts. The trains still ran. The blue line is unromantic in its consistency, and I clung to that. At 4 a.m., the broadcast repeated. I sat at the table with a legal pad and wrote what I heard, by time, as if I was documenting a complicated load-in for a show. I wrote, "Order repeats hourly, voices outside, not panicked. Some are close to the building. Do not open door, check supplies every morning, rotate food, conserve water, keep devices charged, maintain schedule." Making a schedule calmed me. If nothing else, I would treat the next day like a storm day. I would stay off the roads. I would check in with the friends I could reach. I would not guess at answers I did not have. Between 4 o'clock and 5:30 a.m., there were fewer noises. The city outside felt like a stage with the curtains down. At 5 a.m., the broadcast sounded again at the exact top of the hour, and after it ended, my smart speaker chimed even though I had unplugged it. It made the cradle sound it makes when the microphone is re-enabled. I checked the cord. It was still unplugged. My phone lit up. "Emergency alert, do not exit your home." Same words, same number. The copy of the message that reached the speaker sounded slightly different, like a recording made in a different room. I left the speaker unplugged and put it in the closet. At 6 a.m., the broadcast repeated, and then dawn came without cars. The first bus I saw in the new light was parked crooked at the stop, hazard lights dead. The driver's seat was empty. The train still moved, which told me a little of what I needed to know and left out what mattered most. I ate oatmeal and made coffee in a French press and texted Carla, "I have coffee if you need. I can leave a thermos outside your door." She wrote back, "Yes." I filled a thermos and set it on the landing at the top of the stairs without opening the building's back door. I waited to hear her take it. I called out quietly, "It's on the floor by your door," and went back inside. She texted a minute later, "Got it, thank you." The morning felt like a snow day, set in summer. The light was clear, the air steady. No plows, no engines. I checked the building's shared basement. I didn't open the alley door. I checked my generator and topped off its small tank from the safety can I use on jobs. I placed the generator by the back wall where I could run the exhaust away from the stairwell if the power went out. I carried up a folded wagon with pneumatic tires and left it by my door with a note for Carla that she could use it if she needed to move water or anything heavy without going far. I checked on the older couple on the 4th floor by text. I have the husband's number from an incident with a fuse box last year. His name is Anton. He used to teach math. He wrote, "We are inside. We have food for several days. If you hear anything about the elevators downtown, my son works nights." I said I would tell him if I heard anything useful on the scanner. I did not say that I was not sure what counted as useful. The first neighbor who did not answer any method of contact was Mateo. His shop's security gate was down when I looked from the window. It's a manual roll-down he locks with a padlock. There was no light inside. The usual blue La Marzocco sign in the window was dark. Across the street, the tire shop had its garage doors down too. On the corner, the bodega had its metal screen sliding door barely cracked, and then that closed before noon. At 9 a.m., the broadcast repeated. It added a line about not responding to voices outside unless you could verify identity beyond doubt. It added a line about not letting anyone in who is not a resident or an emergency worker with current identification. It did not explain why that line was there now and not at midnight. At 10 a.m., it repeated again with the same addition. I wrote both in my notes. At 11 a.m., it repeated again with the same lines. I marked them down. By midday, I had a plan for the day that made sense. Eat small meals. Limit water to 1 filled cup per hour. Set phone to low power mode. Keep radio on a schedule to save batteries. 20 minutes of scan on the hour and 20 at past. Check in with Carla by text after each broadcast on the hour. Check on Anton and his wife at 2 p.m. and 8 p.m. Keep my work kit staged by the door in case the building lost power and I needed to stabilize anything, but do not open the door for anyone except Carla or building owner if he called from a known number and provided the code word he and I use for repairs. The code word exists because he is forgetful and sometimes gives the wrong person the wrong keys. I wrote the word down on the pad and underlined it 3 times. The day passed. The city remained quiet. In the afternoon, a dark sedan with city plates rolled down the block with a recorded announcement playing in English and Spanish. The volume so high that the words distorted, and the message became more a warning tone than a sentence. It said to stay inside. It said to avoid contact. It did not give a time frame. The sedan drove down to the next block and turned. I did not see where it went. At 5 p.m., a new sound entered. Voices at once. Not loud, not a crowd, but a handful of people talking over each other from the sidewalk and the alley and the bus at the stop. Pieces of phrases arrived without context. It's open. Come here. I know you. I have water. Each phrase had the same flat tone and the same steady pacing broken by oddly placed pauses. The phrases repeated without intensifying. It sounded like the words people use when they want your attention without shouting, assembled from a list and looped. One voice used the name of the woman who used to live in the second-floor corner unit, who moved away in June. The voice said her name and then, "It's me," and then the woman's name again. The pattern repeated, no more urgent than the first time. When someone really needs help, they get louder and they add detail. People under real stress don't keep the pace of a metronome. People under real stress run out of breath. These voices did not. At 6 p.m., the broadcast repeated. I warmed a pan of beans and rice on the stove and ate half and saved half. I stood in the kitchen with the fork in my hand and felt my brain split into 2 layers. The upper layer that handled what was in front of me, the food, the pan, the smell of cumin from the spice jar, and the lower layer that kept recording the sidewalk and returning to the way the man's voice had said my name through the door. The lower layer began assembling rules. 1. Do not open the door. 2. Do not speak to voices in the hall. 3. Confirm identity by code word or by sight through glass of someone you know. 4. Use the notes. Do not rely on memory. At 7 p.m., I used the last of the daylight to tape wax paper over the window above the kitchen sink. The paper blurs movement outside, so sudden changes do not register so sharply in peripheral vision. It's a trick a drummer taught me, a guy who cannot sleep if he sees headlights sweep across a wall. I taped the wax paper to the glass and felt better as soon as its milky texture took the hard edge off the view of the alley. I checked the deadbolt. I checked the chain. I placed my heavy coat by the door and my shoes beside it. At 8 p.m., the broadcast repeated. Right after it ended, new words came from the hall. Not my name this time, my sister's name. Then a sentence that was not in her voice but could have been if you had never met her. It's me. Then, a second later, after a pause slightly too long to be a breath, I need help. The voice did not move toward panic. It did not call me by the family nickname she uses. It did not use any detail that only we would know. The voice repeated the sentence again and then fell silent. I steadied my breath and wrote down what it had said. I wrote, "Voice used N's name. Tone wrong. Said I need help without urgency. Do not open. Wait." At 9 p.m., the broadcast repeated. I plugged a long USB cable into the battery pack and set the phone to charge. I brought the camping stove to the sink and made sure the carbon monoxide alarm registered 0. I heated water and wiped down the counter. In the silence before 10 p.m., the building sounded normal. A soft hum through the walls, the tiny clicks of baseboards, the old radiators resting. The city did not. A helicopter moved north at one point without its usual citywide announcement beforehand. I did not see its markings. It was as if the normal frame-around activity had been removed and only the movement itself remained. At 10 p.m., the broadcast repeated, and immediately afterward the child's voice returned on the sidewalk, the same "Mom?" at the same volume with the same spacing between repetitions. I closed my eyes and counted the seconds, 3 between each. It continued for a full minute and stopped as neatly as a recording. The second night began at 11 p.m. with the alert cycling again and the whole block sounding a fraction more active even while it remained empty to the eye. The voices used fewer words. They seemed to test door handles, a slow brush down the paint. Not forcing, not trying keys. Testing, as if each door were a question on a form and the answer marked something important in a ledger. I made a decision then that felt small and turned out to be the choice that mapped the rest of the week. I would not stand near the door when the voices came. I would not reward them with the subtle creak of floorboards or the shift of light through the peephole. I would go to the rear of the apartment and sit at the table with my back to the wall and the waxed paper over the window and the notes in front of me. And I would breathe through it with the schedule. When the hour came, I would listen to the broadcast and check in with Carla. And if she did not answer, I would not assume that meant harm, because phones die and people sleep. I would hold the rules, and I would not let the lower layer of my mind make me do something I could not undo. On the third morning after the first alert, I woke to sun over the avenue and a feeling like the first day after a big move, when the furniture is in place but the walls are still bare. The building had not lost power. The water ran with a steady stream. The trains still moved. My sister answered a text at 7:20 a.m. We're on lockdown at the hospital. We posted the same order on all the doors. No visitors, stay inside. Do not engage with anyone you can't verify. There's something about the way people are processing sound. Just stay inside. The words processing sound made sense to me in a way that didn't help. I wanted a cause, and I wanted an end. I did not get either. I wrote down what she said and added a line to my rules. Minimize sound that announces position near door. That day, I adjusted things in the apartment to make my routine quieter. I set felt pads under the chair legs. I oiled the front door hinges. I wrapped electrical tape around the rattling latch of a bedroom window so it would not click. I put a towel along the threshold. I did not turn on music. I did not listen to the news. There were no anchors talking anyway, only the alert. I continued to note the times. I labeled each meal. I kept my bag by the door. I added a 10-inch pry bar and a small hammer to the bag because they're useful for repairs and feel good in the hand. I thought about listing the things that felt like they might be weapons and made myself write tools instead. Names matter in your own head. On the fourth day, the building owner called. His number displayed on the screen and the code word came before he said his own name. He asked if everything was working. I told him I had not left the unit and would not. He said not to. He asked if I could please check the basement boiler pressure from inside the building, no going outside because he could not get across the river. I told him I could, and at noon, after the alert, I went down with a flashlight and checked the gauge and sent him a photo. He asked if I needed anything. I asked if he had heard anything else from the city. He said only the same message and a note for building owners to post signs telling residents not to open the door to anyone. I printed that sign and taped it inside the glass of the main entrance so it faced inward toward the stairwell and not outward to the street. The hallway light buzzed. That night, the voices got closer to normal speech. One voice said in passing, "I hurt my knee. Could you please help me?" The sentence held together. It had a plausible shape, but the man speaking it did not vary the volume the way a person holding pain does, and as he said the sentence, another voice on the sidewalk began a different line without acknowledging the first. It was as if I had tuned two radios to two separate conversations that were not aware of each other, but used phrases that carried indoors. The line about the knee repeated twice more and then quit. The other lines kept going on their own loops. On the fifth day, Carla did not answer at 8 a.m. She answered at 9:05 a.m., apologizing that her phone died and she woke up late. She sent a photo of her living room arranged with cushions and a small table in front of her couch as a work surface. She had been journaling to keep time. She wrote that she heard the voices say her father's name correctly. He passed away 3 years ago. That frozen me more than anything else that week. Her father's name is not on the buzzer. I asked if she had said his name out loud in the hallway ever. She said no. I asked if she had said his name out loud in her apartment. She paused and wrote back that she'd been reading aloud from a letter he wrote her once. We did not continue that conversation. She said she was not opening the door. By the 6th day, food became numbers. I cut my meals into parts and saved them. I made rice, cooled it, and portioned it into containers. I kept the fridge closed to hold temperature. I wrote down how many meals I could get from what I had. I wrote down a water plan. I did not open the door. The broadcast kept repeating every hour. Sometimes it came early by a few seconds, which meant either the clock it was set to had drifted or my phone's minutes had. I did not know which. I set my small analog travel alarm to match the alert by ear and used that for timers instead of my phone. By day 7, the second week beginning, people began to vanish. Not on my block. My block had already emptied of visible motion the first night, but from communication. My sister missed her 7 a.m. text. At noon, she wrote that the hospital had moved patients into interior rooms away from windows and were rotating staff to rest in the basement. She said some people were leaving their homes to follow voices they believed to belong to family and then not arriving. The phrasing made my chest go cold. She asked me to keep checking on my neighbors. She asked me to check on Mateo if I could do it without opening the door. I could not think of how to do that. She said not to try. That evening, Anton rang my phone through the building's intercom, which routes through a little relay box to my landline. I picked up and confirmed him with the code word we set between us long ago when we had to coordinate letting a contractor in. He asked if I could listen to a voicemail that had appeared on his phone from an outside number and tell him whether I thought it was a real message. I said I could. He played it over the line. The recording was a man who said he was Anton's son. The message sounded like it had been spliced together from phrases his son might say. It had the right words, but the breath and the rhythm were off. At the end, there was a click, and then quiet underneath the room sound, a single "hello" that did not belong to the same person. I told Anton I did not think it was safe to answer. He said he would not. He thanked me and then asked if I'd heard footsteps on their landing the last night. I had. He asked if I'd seen anyone through the front window. I had not. We hung up and I went to the window and looked down again. The bus still sat crooked at the stop. It had not been towed. No one had broken the glass. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. In a normal emergency, someone always ignores a sign. The second week blended into the third with the regularity of the broadcast and the irregularity of everything else. The city's sanitation trucks did not come. The trash cans in the alley overflowed. The smell rose and then settled as if the air itself had decided not to move much. A few times, someone tried to start a car. The starters whined. Engines coughed. No one got a car running on our block. A block south, I heard one engine catch and then die again. The train kept moving. Its schedule steadied me the way a metronome steadies a student learning a new part. In the middle of the third week, the voices tried new things. One said a 6-digit number like a door code and then said delivery, as if a courier had arrived. No one in our building uses a code lock. Then the voice used the name of a delivery service and said my address and a random apartment number. It said, "I'll leave it at the door." Then, after a beat too long, "Unless you want me to bring it in." I wrote it down and reminded myself aloud that this was not unusual in emergencies. People try to enter buildings to find warmth or shelter, and that the order was to stay inside no matter what. I texted Carla and Anton. They had heard the same. None of us opened the door. 2 days later, the voices tried what any decent con artist tries next: urgency. An even, calm voice called out the numbers 1062, as if it were a building inspection number, and said they needed to check gas lines. I could have looked up the city inspection range for gas work. I did not. The voice did not use the code word. It did not knock with the distinct rhythm our owner uses when he has to show a unit. The voice drifted away. On day 23, the building lost power for the first time. It happened at 2:17 p.m. in the middle of a note I was writing about how to ration the rest of the isobutane cans. The lights snapped off, and the refrigerator compressor spun down. An electric quiet filled the rooms. I put the note down without rushing. We practice this in theaters too. Power failures do not mean panic, they mean specific steps. I stepped into the hall to check if the stairway light was out. It was. I texted Carla and Anton, "Power down, do not open doors." I waited 1 minute to make sure there was no automatic reset. There wasn't. I retrieved the generator from the basement, running it just long enough in the yard to confirm it turned over, and then shutting it down at once so the exhaust didn't linger near the back door. I have a method for this. I set the genset at the far edge of the yard away from windows, pointed exhaust downwind, connected my heavy gauge cord, ran it into the basement window and up the stairwell to my door, and sealed the gaps with plastic and painter's tape. I wore hearing protection. I placed the carbon monoxide alarm by the kitchen, pressed its test button, and watched it read 0. I ran the generator for 20 minutes to cool my freezer and charge batteries, then shut it down. In between, I listened. The moment the engine stopped, I heard voices in the alley again, closer than usual, as if they had come to listen to the motor. I did not move. After a minute, the footsteps went away. I sealed the basement window again as much as I could from inside and noted that I would only run the generator during daylight and only when absolutely necessary. I added a new rule: make power a routine too, so I did not have to decide each time whether to risk noise. We lived like that for 5 days. Power on for an hour in the morning, off for the rest of the day. Power on for an hour in the evening to cool the fridge. Quiet otherwise. The broadcast kept time. It had not changed its words in days. Once, at 1 a.m. on day 25, the message added a line: "Teams are working." I recognized the phrasing. It's the sentence used when the city does not want to say when the road will reopen but wants to indicate motion. "Teams are working." The line disappeared the next hour and did not return. On day 28, a city truck came up the block and stopped by the bus. 2 workers in reflective gear got out. They did not shout. They did not knock on doors. They checked the bus, wrote numbers on a clipboard, and used a long tool to pull a piece of yellow tape across the front of it and then another across the back. They sprayed something on the driver's window to remove fingerprints. One of them looked up and saw me at the 3rd-floor window. He did not wave. He pointed to his ear and held his other palm out flat, like a stop sign. He stood that way until I nodded. Then he got back in the truck. They left without removing the bus. The tape fluttered in the breeze and then held. The next day, the truck returned with a crew in white coveralls and shields on their faces. They opened the bus. 2 people went in. 2 waited at the door. No one spoke. They removed a bag and sealed the bus and left. I did not like what that implied. I wrote, "Do not assume empty vehicles are empty," and added, "Do not go near vehicles." The second month is where the story narrows. It's where the choice set by the broadcast changes from a command to a daily decision I have to recommit to. Rules keep you safe in the first days because they are clear and because everything in you agrees with them. Past day 30, rules begin to feel like walls that you learn to build. You begin to test the corners and see if anything yields. You think, "It's been quiet for a while. Maybe I could step into the stairwell to check the front door lock," even though the lock has held for years. You think, "No one has been by in hours. Maybe I could sit at the window longer," even though the sidewalk teaches you nothing you can use. You stop hearing the broadcast as a thing you do, it becomes a clock, and in that gap between the clear order and the dull metronome, the voices put in new work. They began using names from further away. One evening, a voice said my sister's name again, which I could explain, and then a minute later said the name of the bartender at the Fullerton venue, which I could not. That name exists in my life, but her voice does not. The voice outside had no accent. It used the same steady third-person pacing to say her name like a word on an index card. Then it said, in a normal tone, "I have your check from last week," and then my actual last name, and then the first half of my address. Each fragment was correct. If I had not already learned to disassemble the way they spoke, it would have hit me like a hand on the shoulder. Instead, my brain ran the script I had written. The details were right, but the breath was wrong. The offer was wrong in time. I wrote the pieces down and ate the second half of my evening meal and set my phone to airplane mode to avoid a notification that might carry someone else's voice. On day 35, Carla made a choice I would not have made, and we are both alive because she did. The building's main door hinges squealed the night before despite oiling, and she heard movement in the hall near her door an hour later that did not match any pattern we had clocked. She texted me with the sound. It came in 3 intervals: a shuffle, a stop, and then a sound like an object sliding on wood. She paused, and then, against the rules, she spoke through her door without opening it. She said, "This is Carla," and then she said the code word we use. She said, "If you are a neighbor, say your name and the code word." A full minute passed. There was breathing in the hall a foot from her door. Then a voice said her name. It said it wrong, with the emphasis on the wrong syllable the way someone says it when they read it and have never heard it said. It followed with the code word, but it said the beginning right and dropped the last 2 letters, like someone who had only heard it once through a wall. She wrote the result down on her pad and slid the paper under the door. The paper came back with the same spelling as the voice had used. She did not open the door. Her confidence in the test steadied me more than the alert that hour did. For the next few days, we added layers to the tests like people add layers of tape to a floor that needs to hold a cable. We included mundane details in our questions that anyone who lived here would know: where the hallway light buzzed, which side of the stairs creaked on the 3rd step, and we asked that in 2 languages because we are a bilingual building. We asked for voices to repeat back a sentence that requires easy breathing. "There is a draft under your door and it moves my mail," because that string forces the mouth to make a soft th and a r and a feet, and to shorten the breath that moves. The voices failed. Not because they could not form the consonants, but because they could not or would not carry the breath the right way between words. They repeated the sentence as if it were a line a high school actor learned by sounding out each word carefully. No one in this building talks that way through a door. We did not open. Day 40 is where food becomes a question. I had set aside enough to reach this date if I ate calm, bland meals and rationed a little tighter each week. I had been passing pre-made coffee and water to Carla on the landing. We had been sharing information and battery power. Anton and his wife had their own stores, but even with planning, shelves empty. There's a difference between rationing and starvation. I started to think about the corner store 2 buildings down. I started to think about the coffee shop with its walk-in fridge and dry stores and the fact that I knew the alarm code because I had helped fix an outlet 2 months ago when a breaker tripped and Matteo had to reset it to get the espresso machine back online. I told myself I would not use that code. It was not mine to use. I told myself I would ask him first if he ever answered. On day 41, a different kind of message arrived. It was not from the phone or the speaker or the voices. It was a note slid under my door in a plain white envelope, real paper with a pre-printed hospital logo from the county system. The logo matched the one on my sister's ID. The note said, in my sister's handwriting, that the hospital had moved her unit to an interior wing for safety and that she could not leave. That the city was shutting down certain utilities temporarily in specific areas to manage load and that we should expect rolling outages. That aid would come, but that we should not open doors regardless of the uniform worn by the person asking us to. At the bottom, she had written a line that only she and I would know, referencing a broken lamp we had as kids and the way we lied about how it broke. She wrote the truth and the date. My chest went hot with the relief of a real detail. I took the note to the window and stared at the paper in the angle of the light like I was a jeweler looking for a flaw. The paper had been folded and unfolded several times. There was a smudge where she always touches down a pen too hard on the first letter of a sentence. I wrote to her that I got it. The message never delivered. The note is still on my table under a glass bowl to keep it flat. And then, after the real note, a not real one came the next day, same envelope, same logo, different handwriting, telling me to meet a city worker at the door for a wellness check. It had no detail, only she would know. I took a photo. I slid it under Carla's and Anton's doors so they would know to expect another attempt. They slid it back with their initials. We did not open. On day 44, when the sun was clean and the wind off the lake smelled like cold metal, I chose to break a rule for an hour. Not the main rule, not the door. I broke the silence rule. I took out my small digital voice recorder, the kind I used to capture room tone, and I set it by the window for 15 minutes at the top of the hour and 15 minutes halfway between each broadcast. I wanted to measure the voices, to see if they had repeat patterns that could be matched. I recorded 3 hours of segments. Then I sat at the table with my headphones and I listened with the same attention I bring to editing a band in a noisy room. The trace showed peaks at regular intervals, the way the child's mom had struck every 3 seconds, and overlaying that I heard variations that did not line up with a human breathing pattern. No pattern lasted long. It was not white noise. It was a series of short loops chained together awkwardly. The only segment that did not fit that description was a single voice that said my name and then said, "I found your wallet," and then correctly stated the color and brand of the wallet I lost in a snowbank outside the venue 3 years ago. That detail should have broken me. It did not. It made me angry. I wrote down, "Memory is not a friend," and I closed the recorder. By day 46, the choice began to present itself not as a fork, but as a fog. The broadcasts, the voices, the schedule, the rationing, the uneven chance of power. It all blended until the question did not feel like, do I follow the order or not? But do I admit that following the order is a choice I can still make? When you have done something 50 times in a row, doing it a 51st time takes less effort than denying you had a choice to do otherwise. I tried to look at that fact straight. I set another rule: treat each hour as its own day. Make the decision fresh. Do not let fatigue turn your schedule into superstition. On day 47, something new moved on the block. A bicycle with a small trailer rolled slowly past the bus, guided by a person wearing a construction helmet and a reflective vest. The bike's wheels clacked through the cracks. The person did not look up. They stopped every building or two and lifted the lid of a plastic tote in the trailer and set a sealed bag on each stoop. I watched from the corner of the window. When they reached our building, they did not ring. They placed the bag and rolled on. The bag sat on the bottom step. It had a color band and a printed sheet inside and a sticker that said City Food. I did not open the door to get it. I waited 2 hours. The bag stayed. I texted Carla, and we watched the bag those 2 hours. Then I wrapped a scarf around my nose and mouth, opened my door quietly, stayed inside my threshold without stepping into the stairwell, reached down with my grabber tool, one of those extendable claws I used to pick gaffer tape off a floor without kneeling, and pulled the bag up the steps without touching it. I set it inside the doorway and closed the door and locked it again and put the bag in the sink. There were 2 shrink-wrapped meal bars in it and a bottle of water with an intact seal and a little card that said the same thing as the broadcast and nothing more. I opened one bar. It tasted like compressed oatmeal and dates. I split the second bar with Carla later by passing it hand to hand with nitrile gloves on and a brief pause to let the air settle. We did not open the stairwell door to the alley for any reason. On day 50, the decision I had been avoiding became not a thought experiment but a practical issue. Rice low, beans low, power off for 2 days straight, likely from the rolling outages my sister warned me of, and the generator fuel almost gone. The bags from the bike had stopped 3 days earlier. Mateo had still not answered. My sister's messages were infrequent, and I did not know if that was because of the hospital or the network. The city had not towed the bus. The voices had moved away from names and back again from urgency to calm, like they, too, were following a schedule I could not see. At 10 p.m., the broadcast repeated with the same words. I sat at the table with my notes and I wrote the question I did not want to write. When does the rule to stay inside become dangerous because of hunger or power? Under it, I wrote 2 columns, one with the reasons to stay and one with the reasons to open the door. In the stay column, I wrote, known environment, known neighbors. Unknown voices note from N relief bike exists danger outside not measurable. In the open column, I wrote, food nearby at shop need fuel need information. I put the pen down. When you write it like that, it becomes math, and math demands a decision. But life is not math. You can add a third column, adapt, and fill it with actions that allow both staying and change. I wrote in that third column, call for help without opening signal through window at specific hour note to bike person build drop line for supplies. Test hallway with mirror run generator at set times only use stove, sparingly create rope to lower bag to Carla if needed. The adapt column made me feel like a person again instead of a nail waiting for a hammer. I slept. On day 51 at 9 a.m., I taped a note inside the front glass of the building, facing inward at eye level with block letters, residents inside, do not knock. Leave supplies on stoop. Back away 30 feet. We will retrieve after 10 minutes. I printed the same message in Spanish under it. I added the number of our units and wrote, thank you. I used painter's tape I could remove later. I went back upstairs and texted Carla and Anton that the sign was up. I did not wait by the door. I went to the window. The block stayed quiet. At noon, when the bike did not come and no one else had moved, I wrote another note in small letters, on paper, folded, addressed to City, thanking them for the earlier aid and asking for more, and I taped it inside the glass below the other note. It felt like shouting into a void, but it was something I could do that did not violate the rules. That afternoon, at 2 p.m., a young man in a green jacket walked down the sidewalk reading each building's glass. He looked official only in the way he carried himself, like someone with a task that had a line of boxes to check. He had a clear face shield and a mask. He read our sign, nodded to himself, and set a bag on the step, then stepped away and waited out by the curb, hands visible, facing the building. He did not speak. He did not lift his face shield. He stood there until my timer reached 10 minutes. Then he turned and walked away without looking back. I retrieved the bag with the grabber and split it with Carla and sent a message of thanks to Anton for catching it on his camera and confirming the time for me in case I had miscounted. It was not enough food for the week. It was enough to make the decision smaller. At 10 p.m. that night, a voice outside said my name and the words, "I'm by the coffee shop." Then, "I'm stuck." It used the right inflection on stuck for the first time in weeks. The sound you make when a door jams. It said, "I need the code." Then it named the coffee shop, not by the name on the sign, but by the nickname Mateo uses when he texts me about the grinder. I held the pen in my hand and did not write. My heart rate climbed, my palms warmed. I stood away from the door with my back to the kitchen wall, and I said to the air, "No." I said, "Not now." I held the rule steady, as if it were a heavy piece of equipment on a cart that wants to roll toward an edge. The voice repeated, softer, a test of volume. It waited the same 3 seconds it always waits. It said the nickname again, then my name, then code. I set the pen down. I texted Carla without explaining the content of the voice. "Do we open for any reason?" She wrote back, "No." I did not open the door. Day 52 passed with smaller noises and a sky so clear I could follow planes headed to O'Hare by their contrails. I ate a measured meal. I cleaned the frying pan and set it by the stove. I filled the kettle. I slept between alerts. On the morning of day 53, at 9 a.m., a different vehicle came up the block. It was a city van with a light bar, not a police car or a fire truck, but something in between. The kind they use for utility calls. 2 people in thick gloves and face shields put door hangers on each building's handle. They approached our door with practiced caution. They looked at our sign, then their clipboard, and hung the notice neatly. They knocked once, stepped back, waited, and when no one answered, they moved on. I waited 10 minutes, then opened my door and used the grabber again to bring the hanger up the stairs. It was a sheet that said, "City Notice, Shelter in Place Continues," and that included a QR code and a paragraph about services. The paragraph had no new information. The QR code meant nothing to me. The internet had gone to a crawl days before, and only loaded text pages now. The sheet included a local hotline that simply repeated the alert when you called. But at the bottom, in small type, there was a line. Food distribution expected in the next 48-72 hours. Do not exit your home to meet trucks. Supplies will be left at buildings. I pinned the notice to my wall and decided to stretch what I had to make it to day 56. On night 53, the voices tried again with new material. A woman's voice said my name and, "I'm with your sister." Then she asked me to come. Then I brought a letter. The voice did not use the turn of phrase my sister always uses about work, my unit, or her habit of answering a question with a question when she is tired. The voice used the words like a list. I let the words pass. An hour later, a different voice, lower, said my name and, "There's a smell coming from your door." in a tone that any neighbor would use to indicate a leak or a gas issue. I checked the carbon monoxide alarm. I checked the stove knob. I checked the trash. Everything was normal. I did not open the door. On day 54 in the early afternoon, the coffee shop's security gate was up. I didn't see it happen. I looked down and it was just open. The light inside was on. It was the first interior light I had seen on our block since the city trucks came. I texted Carla and Anton with a photo. Then a shape passed the front window and my breath caught. Mateo's baseball cap, the one with the small mountain logo. A figure moved behind the bar. The espresso machine lit up. The small grinder whirred. It made the sound it always makes when someone forgets to lock it after cleaning. My hand moved to the apartment door and froze there. The sign in my building, the broadcast, my sister's letter, all of it, were suddenly paper against a door. And the door wanted to open because the open gate and the lit machine were facts and not sounds. Before I could decide anything, the figure in the coffee shop stepped into the window light. It was Mateo's height and had his jacket, but the jacket hung wrong, the shoulders too square for him, and the hands were bare in the way his never were. He covers a healing scar on his knuckles with a band. The figure stood and faced the street, and then it did nothing. It did not arrange a cup, it did not check the register. It did not tap familiarly on the counter the way he does when something starts. It stood as if someone had told it that people stand in windows and that standing there would convince a person indoors to forget every rule they had built for 54 days. I stepped back from the window and shut my eyes and matched my breathing to the second hand on my travel clock. After a minute, the grinder turned off. The light remained on. The gate remained up. That night, a new voice came right to my door. It was Mateo's voice as recorded over his own voicemail greeting. The same audio quality, the same inflection on his own name that he always jokes about. His voice said my name and then, please. The please had the same pacing as every other please I had heard. The man who owns that voice in life draws his vowels out on please because he is a warm person and wants the word to feel like an actual request. The word at my door was a copy of a word, not a request. I pressed my palm to the cool wood and said quietly, not for the thing outside to hear, but for myself, I hear you. I am staying inside. On day 55, the food truck came. Not a truck exactly, but a small cart pushed by two people in white coats with the same city logo as before. They moved building to building. One person placed the bag, one person watched. They did not make eye contact with windows. They left twice what they left the last time. They repeated the route hours later with bottled water. They worked like a stagehand crew moving cases at a festival. Methodically, not looking up, not talking. Our block had become a quiet stage, and the action was not in the lines of people, but in the lines of tape and notes, and the exaggeration of certain simple gestures. Placing, waiting, leaving. I retrieved the bag and split it. I charged my phone a little while the building's power returned. That night, the broadcast repeated on the hour, and the voices were less. That night, for the first time, I slept for 3 solid hours. I would like to say that was the turning point. I would like to say that the city increased the deliveries and that the voices faded. But the truth is less cinematic and more like weather. Some days were better, some worse, and the measure of living became not, when will this end, but what can I build that will let me stay in place one more day, and then another, and then another. We built a drop line across the stairwell, a rope with a small basket we could pass between our doors without opening into the hallway. We built a light code with our phones, 1 blink for I'm okay, 2 blinks for do you need anything, 3 blinks for answer when safe, always at set times so we would not move to the door unexpectedly when a voice might be listening. We set a rule for every action. We broke a few at first and learned which ones were lines and which ones were protocols. We treated "don't exit your home" not as a sentence we had to fight against, but as a sentence we had to learn to implement well. On day 62, I made the closest thing to the choice the title of this story points to. It was late at night. The broadcast had just ended. The street was quiet. The coffee shop remained open, light on, no motion inside. I was at the kitchen table labeling a small bag of rice when a knock came at the door with a pattern that could only be our building owners. Too quick, one slow, too quick. Then the code word. Then his voice saying my name and an apology that he could not get through earlier. My hand reached for the chain. I held it there and asked a question only he would know. What is the number of the breaker that trips when the hallway light buzzes? There was a pause. Not the awkward, strange pause of the voices, but the human pause of a person searching memory under stress. He said the right number. I asked, "What's the first thing you said about the plaster in the back bedroom when I moved in?" He said, "It cracks in a straight line." That was not exactly what he had said the first day, but it was the kind of phrasing he uses. He asked if I could check the boiler again. He said he could not stay. He said he had to make it to another building. I slid the chain up, and then I stopped. I remembered Carla's test and the paper under the door. I remembered the grinder noise at the coffee shop and the way the figure had stood. I remembered my sister's true note and the fake one. I remembered the boy's voice that said "Mom" every 3 seconds without breath. I told him I would check the boiler and that I would text him a photo. I left the chain on. I went down to the basement and took a picture and sent it. He wrote back thanks. The message came through. The number matched. He did not wait by my door or ask me to open it. He did not try to talk me around the chain. He did not leave a letter under my door or ask me to meet him outside. He moved on. I did not open the door. I stood in the hallway and listened hard until the sound of his steps faded and did not return with another tone riding under them. I went back inside. I locked the deadbolt and set the chain again and sat down at the table and made myself finish labeling the bag. Today is day 69. The broadcast still comes hourly, though it skipped once at 3 a.m. and then doubled at 4 a.m., as if someone had knocked a cable loose and then found it again. The city's deliveries now come twice a week, inconsistent but enough that the third column, the adapt column, feels like a plan and not wishful thinking. The voices are less frequent during the day and more insistent at dusk, as if they are on a schedule too. They still use names. They still test with words like open and help. They still sometimes find the shape of someone's voice I know and fit that shape over a sentence with the wrong breath. I still do not open the door. I still test each hour as if I have a choice. I have lost weight. My hair has grown too long. I keep the kitchen clean and the notes tidy. I text Carla in the morning and at night in case the lights go out. Anton and his wife nap in the afternoon when the voices are less. At night, we sit at our separate tables and hear the broadcast tone like a metronome the whole city is practicing to. Each of us playing a different part, each of us on our own measure, trying to match the beat without letting it define the song. People ask in normal times what kind of person they would be in an emergency. The one who runs into the street to help, or the one who stays put. That's not the question this time. The question this time is whether you can be the kind of person who listens to a sentence that seems simple. Do not exit your home. And understand that it is not a slogan, and it is not a dare, and it is not walls closing in. It is a practice. It's a practice of trust that the floor under you and the walls around you and the neighbors near you and the schedule you built together matter more than the voices that try, skillfully and with a detail to rearrange the lines in your head. I stand at my window some evenings, behind the edge of the curtain, and I watch the light on the coffee shop without staying long enough to make a habit of it. The grinder does not run anymore. The gate stays up. The light keeps on for a while after sunset and then cuts out regardless of night. The bus remains taped. The sign on our door is curled at the corners where humidity has got it. The child's voice has not returned in days. The man who says my name stopped yesterday and then 1 hour later said Carla's instead, like a person who moves to another door when the first does not open. It is a pattern as old as any city, and it wears new clothes here, but it is not new. The rule holds. Tonight, when the hour comes and the broadcast plays, I will sit at the table with the notebook open and the pen ready, and I will write the time. I will eat a measured meal. I will set the chair back on its felt pads. I will breathe with the second hand. I will text my sister even if she does not answer. I will remember the true letter she wrote, the ink pressed hard at the first letter, and I will set that truth against the list of voices outside that can bring up 10 correct details without bringing the one thing that makes a voice a person, the breath and the break where someone's life has made a mark on their words. I cannot explain what is outside any better than that. I do not need to. I have what I need: the door, the chain, the notes, the neighbors, the schedule, the practice. If there is a day that asks for a different choice, I will know it not from a voice but from the way the air moves when someone real stands on the landing and sets down a heavy bag and shifts their weight from one foot to the other because they are late to the next building and their back hurts from carrying for the city. Until then, I will follow the order and make it not a command I resent, but a choice I own. If there is anything I have learned in these weeks, it is that survival is not only about what you can build, but also what you refuse to be pulled into. Not every question deserves an answer. Not every sound is a call. Some sounds are tests. Some are loops. Some are fragments. The mind is a good editor when you give it clear tracks. On the first night, I thought I would make it through by counting the trains and measuring power output and tracking the broadcast's seconds precisely. Those helped. But the thing that holds, the thing that keeps the handle from turning when my hand jumps toward it before my judgment can catch up, is smaller and simpler than any instrument. I speak the rule out loud. I say, I am staying inside. I say, I do not open the door. I say it quietly so that only I hear it, and then I listen for the next hour and the next. The sentences have the same length each time I say them. They fit in the breath I have. They do not need to last forever. They need to last to the next hour. Then I say them again. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.